Let's see, and the clock is spinning, so that means we've started. So everybody, thanks so much for joining us. You're in Enterprise ENT311-R. The R means this session will be repeated, but this is not the repeat. And then it's called Enterprise DevOps Patterns of Efficiency. My name's Mike Eshu. I'm with the AWS Managed Services team. I lead our customer onboarding and adoption program, and I'm here with Ajit.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Ajit Jhargaonkar. I run the global DevOps practices in AWS Professional Service. As part of my role, I travel around the globe with my teams and help many customers like you. Not too long ago, by the way, I was one of the customers, like very same like you, sitting on the other side of the table, but then decided to learn a lot more fine-grained things related to DevOps. So that's why we are here. And
let's tell you about our agenda. All right. So first of all, how many people are in some way, shape, or form practicing DevOps today? Like show of hands. Wow. Wow, very nice, very good. Ajit would be pleased as he's driving this, indeed. And so who's heard of Enterprise DevOps? Raise your hand. It's kind of a newer term, fair enough, fair enough. Who's ITIL certified in some way? Got that ITIL Foundation certification? Okay, you can. Don't you might. We'll see. All right. So today we're here to talk about a concept we've been using called Enterprise DevOps, and in order to do that, we're going to, of course, define the term for you. It's a relatively new concept, and then we're going to talk about some of the patterns of efficiency that we've seen in customers going about adopting DevOps at Enterprise DevOps. And then we're super excited that we're joined by two of our customers. We've got Steve from National Australia Bank, NAB, and Jason from Fidelity, who are going to be able to talk about their experiences as customers implementing these types of strategies within their business. And we'll tell you a lot more about them when we get to them. They'll get a full introduction. But first of all, there's a great debate.
Well, there is not really debate, but there are more arguments. Is DevOps really for enterprises? Is it really helping, or do we need to go back and do some other version of ITIL or something? So there are lots of arguments on both sides of it. The reality is everyone needs to think DevOps, and DevOps is a mindset. We are not talking about processes. We are not talking about tools. The process is about how do we get more efficient in reaching out to our customers, how do we get more efficient on doing more innovation, how do we reduce our support cost of running a business or our support cost of IT, and those are good arguments on both sides. But let's understand what's underneath it, what's driving it. So no surprises, right? Enterprises need more speed and more agility. And many of them need for different reasons. Some want to get ahead of the curve. Some want to reach out to their customers more often. Some are doing it for their existence. Some are doing it for their relevance. But reality is all of us, I'm counting all of you, we all want speed. We want to reach out to a customer much faster. When we do that, we don't want to fall victim of speed and fall off the cliff and die. And that's where the DevOps comes in. When I'm traveling across and meeting with a number of customers, all of them are interested like all of you. They want to understand how does DevOps fit into enterprise scope, what's in there. And all of them have started journey. Most of them are maturing. Many of them are in early stages. So they are all over the spectrum. Now, irrespective of, even after doing that, only 13% enterprises have fully implemented. There's a survey from last year that Forrester shared. And that tells us something, that there are probably struggles on why the number is so low. Mike?
All right. And so, yeah, why are they so low? Why aren't, most of the people in this room were practicing DevOps? Is everybody who raised their hand in that first part, are you DevOpsing everything you do in your business today? Every single team, every IT team, your ERP system, is that all being DevOps? Raise your hand. Right? So few people, right? I mean, that is not the majority, though. The majority of the room is in some fashion practicing DevOps. So what's getting in the way? What are the challenges on that journey? I'm going to take the first two. Legacy applications. I mentioned ERP, existing processes. And those kind of go together, right? One of my favorite stories from last reInvent was when our security manager was in a hotel room, I believe it was over at the Wynn, reviewing the customer who we were working with, their AD policy, which I think had been authored somewhere in 2004 or 2005. So it was authored before the cloud happened. One of the requirements of that policy that is all ADs and domain controllers were hosted on bare metal in that customer's data center. And that probably made a lot of sense. Like, I get it. In 2004, there only was the customer's data center. You either had colo or outsourcing. The cloud hadn't come along. And so one of the things that was preventing them from getting to DevOps was an enterprise integrated access management model that could deliver those AD controls for elevated privileged access. So that's got to get implemented. We've got to change our policies so that we can move those existing applications, which may be fundamentally dependent on the domain to which the instance is joined. We're talking about some of our older applications, not serverless and so on, but those need to be considered when we're trying to transform our enterprise and get some of the benefits DevOps is going to be able to do. And I always like to answer the question, how do you DevOps a COTS application? Lots of ways. You're always, applying fixes, going through incident management, putting patches on, changing a configuration, expanding it for the business. So there's reasons you need to iterate on COTS implementations, commercial off the shelf. And then we have compliance, governance, and security. And the other story I'd use with compliance, governance, and security is I remember I was in a customer workshop and working with a woman, well, let's call her Carol Compliance, and she was legitimately concerned with the cloud program she was putting in, that we were putting in at this customer, was going to impact the company's ability to be compliant. And she'd worked at the company for 25 years, was very concerned, and a lot of emotional attachment to the success of the company, and saw the cloud program as a risk. And so I happened to be sitting next to her, and I was able to turn to her during a break and talk about some of the ideas of, hey, you know how you audit your teams once a year? Yeah, sure. And I give them a list of 75 long of all the things they need to fix before the next audit the next year. What if you could audit them systematically every day, and when you identified a compliance violation, you could just flag the team. Just one thing, hey, if you can get this done this week, no big deal. And then the next week, maybe get another one, and eventually the team starts to get annoyed, and they just kind of manage compliance, and they don't start coming up anymore. So it's just an example of how you can partner with governance, compliance, and security to start thinking about a wider adoption of enterprise DevOps in your business. So there's some myths, and that's what we're going to talk about for the next 4 slides. Myths about DevOps. Myths from that side of the organization, maybe that ITIL side of the organization, traditional IT side of the organization, of which many of us might be a part of, that really, DevOps is just stripped down ITIL. What we're going to do is take ITIL for all its wealth of processes, right? So ITIL is a bunch of books. It's 5 books if you don't know it. And it's a great starting point if you need a process for incident management. They've got a good one in there. So maybe we just say, well, we're going to do DevOps, and so now the application team is going to do it, and we won't need governance anymore. Finance doesn't really matter. We won't do incident management anymore. Change management, the devs will just push it. It'll be fine. If they break it, they'll fix it. We've seen the keynotes on that. So DevOps is just stripped down to ITIL. DevOps dilutes governance, right? We take all that governance, and I don't know how many times I've heard like the change advisory board meets but once a quarter or once a month, and ITIL is going to dilute all that governance. Notice there's nothing in ITIL that I believe says you need the CAB to approve it. It's an advisory board. But if you build that approval process, it's something you implemented at your company. ITIL didn't tell you to do that. And there's some few more myths.
I like how you waited on ITIL. That's maybe because you have certification.
I've got it.
Well, so the next one, this is my favorite one. A lot of time, many of us think DevOps is all about CI/CD. Well, there may be truth to it, that may be at the center of it, but that's not all. There is a lot more to it that makes CI/CD successful. That's how do you build in, how do you socialize, how do you repeat. There are a lot of things that goes in. So if you're looking at DevOps as a CI/CD in a very narrow fashion, then don't waste your time. There are lots of blogs out there. They'll give you a template, and you can create orchestration in 2 minutes. But then making orchestration that allows you to have millions of deployments go through on a way that reduces your risk portfolio, then that's an art, and that's what we're talking about. That's a real DevOps. It's not just the speed, but it's also about balancing all of the things that we need. Another one, not my favorite, but it's, I hear a lot of time that, oh, DevOps is not for us. We are enterprise, we are large scale, and DevOps is only for startups. Again, that may be true. That's where it started. That's where a lot of lessons are learned. But there is no truth to it. The very reason that we all are here in this room, you all are interested, that talks about how interested we all are into implementing DevOps into our businesses, into how we do engineering. So let's look into what is enterprise DevOps.
That's right. So we've defined these challenges. We've defined these myths. Hopefully, is it resonating? Do you guys find those myths in your day-to-day journey as you interact with the team? Show of hands, like reasonable? That happens, right? For some. Talk to your colleague after the presentation and sort of understand what some of those myths might be. Or really what it is, right, are these monsters or these concerns that folks that haven't been brought along on the DevOps journey are throwing up. And I think most of the time, those concerns come from a genuine place. So what we're trying to balance, or what we'd advocate for, is ITIL and DevOps are sharing a majority of the same values. Business value, like ITIL doesn't say go slow and be expensive. DevOps doesn't say have a lot of outages and have the application go down when the team takes Thanksgiving break. Hopefully nobody had an outage over the past long weekend. Minimal disruption, that's a value both ITIL and DevOps would value. And then continuous improvement. Of the 5 books of ITIL, the last one is continuous service improvement. And then, of course, DevOps is about getting better every cycle, every iteration, improving, enabling the people to fix the problem, fix it right away. So if we bring these things together, we get enterprise DevOps. You can leverage the best of both worlds. And so out there's this idea of those myths. DevOps teams they don't really know how to operate. And that might come from the central IT department. And from the DevOps team, well, central IT doesn't understand what I'm trying to achieve. They don't understand the agility. They don't understand the business pressures. They don't understand how I need to try out different instance sizes for a month or so, get that data, and then optimize for cost. And maybe, frankly, the DevOps teams don't know how to optimize for cost. And maybe, or they're not incentivized to do it. Or maybe the DevOps teams could learn something from the central IT team about incident management and change management. And so it's fun working at Amazon. I get to be a part of this cultural debate every day. If I go up to most Amazonians, and I had the opportunity to be a product manager for a while at Amazon on one of our 2-pizza teams, and I would say, well, we practice world-class ITIL at Amazon. No, we're not. We're DevOps. We're full stack. Really? Tell me about change management. Oh, we go through a process. It's bar raised. The security gets a lot of eyes on it. Kind of sounds like a change advisory board to me, but okay. Semantics. Incident management. We have a single ticketing system across all of Amazon that allows us to sort of page anybody, ticket anyone in. Is that ITIL or is that DevOps? Maybe it's enterprise DevOps at scale across an entire organization. Clicker is, there we go. All right. So enterprise DevOps, it's about these values or these principles of embracing and extending new and best practice, whether that comes from our resolute incident management teams that understand LSE management, know how to do large production issue calls when it's spanning multiple DevOps teams, or it's a DevOps team partnering with a compliance team, Carol Compliance that we talked about earlier, to codify a control. How many DevOps teams have reached out to compliance and say, hey, I understand you're actually trying to protect the business. You're trying to prevent us from doing something illegal. There's a lot of complicated laws out there. You're trying to ensure that we attain our compliances so we can do business in the market we are, whether we're financial services or healthcare. There's a lot of rules. And say, hey, could we try codifying this audit? Could I help you? Maybe we could codify. Let's set a goal this year, 20% of the audit, I codify, and you get a compliance report every day. And then maybe next year we do 40%. And I would bet we can get darn near 80, 90, maybe 100% of codified compliance. But I do think it's unlikely that the compliance team will come to the DevOps team and say, hey, can you DevOps compliance for me? Right? It's going to have to drive a culture of inclusion. And it's going to include legacy apps. And it's going to include deep partnership with these different business teams from security, compliance, governance, finance, networking, access management, whatever those teams are, whatever your organizational structure is, you're going to have to partner with them. And the DevOps teams, in many ways, are going to need to lead that conversation, which means your immediate business value creation may get slightly delayed, and you're going to need to bring in those other teams, and eventually you're going to get faster, better, cheaper, more value delivered for the business as a result of those partnerships that you build through your culture of inclusion. And as a result, in-source value creation, outsource undifferentiated heavy lifting, or undifferentiated business value creation. Don't go invent a pager system. Don't go invent a ticketing system, right? We can easily bring those in. We can bring process in. We can bring process expertise in, but then build that value internally for your businesses. So I like to use these operating model diagrams, and I would love to leave these with you. So if I could sort of leave a thought with you from my portion of the talk, think about these 4x4 diagrams. So vertically, I divide design and engineering from operations. Horizontally, I divide application layer from the infrastructure layer. And sure, we could debate for an hour or so of what fits in what box. That's not the point. The idea is to make this very simple. It helps you answer a question of who does what. And so we have a tale of 3 operating models. Of course, we could all define many more. We could draw these little 4-square diagrams for a while, thinking about who's going to do what, and is it up to the patched operating system, or is it the patched middleware? Who's going to patch JBoss? Like, we could debate that. And maybe it's a DevOps team, and you're all the way on the left-hand side, and one team is doing everything. If you're coming from a startup, those folks that raised their hands that were suggesting they're fully implemented on DevOps, they're probably farther over on the side. They've got teams that are doing everything. And then over on the right-hand side are your more traditional IT systems. Sometimes compliance drives you to a fully divided 4-square model. But you've taken the time to think, OK, I'm going to have cloud engineering. Those are my architects that are going to kind of develop pattern sets that are deployable by application development teams that will then be operated by different application operations teams. Think for a second about ERP, where there's sometimes regulatory mandates. The developer can't touch production. And there's laws. And those laws aren't going to change tomorrow. There's reasons to do a traditional IT operating model. Maybe your colo still operates that way. Maybe your data center still operates that way. And then, of course, we mentioned DevOps. And then what you start to find is there's this middle model. And my hope is a lot of this middle model resonates with several folks doing DevOps today in the enterprise. They've said, OK, networking team, you're networking experts. You're still very valuable. You got the guys with the Juniper logos at the top of the resume. Cloud is not going to disrupt their job. It's so valuable to have networking professionals. They just need to learn cloud technologies, AWS VPCs, so that they can configure and support a fleet of accounts. And that would go into that bottom layer. And governance and security. Remember those Active Directory policies. We could actually be running the AWS Managed Active Directory service. And that could be a way of extending our data plane access management system into the cloud. And we can partner with compliance. And while we still may need to do audits, we can codify a large portion of them. We can reduce those burdens on the development teams. So hopefully you take away these 4-square models. I'd encourage you all, it's kind of like if you've ever seen the business model canvas, just take a minute with your team and say, really, who's doing what? And is the right person in the right box is the model that we're going after for our IT transformation? Are we getting the business results we want from who does what? Are we able to effectively outsource low business value, heavy lift? Are we pulling in the right tools? Think about people, process, and tools, but it starts with people. And you can use these 4-square diagrams to think through that. So given that you sort of have a common understanding of what we believe enterprise DevOps is, we see a lot of patterns of efficiency of customers consuming enterprise DevOps. So Jeet's going to share some of those with you, and then we'll talk about our customer use cases.
One of the things that I really like about the middle bucket that you saw earlier in the slide operating models, almost every efficient DevOps team inherently, when they achieve efficiency, they fall back into the middle tier, where they have subject matter expertise that are allowing them to scale the model, enable the teams, and really gain to the next level of efficiency. The full stack engineering term that we hear a lot in DevOps world, I haven't seen any true enterprise going into that right model. Neither in startups, I've never seen that. But when they reach that place, they retrain our teams and they come back to the middle tier. But let's look into patterns of efficiencies. Now, when we talk about DevOps, the most important thing is we all know what DevOps is. We all know the fundamentals of it. But how do you scale? Are there patterns that will help you gain efficiency? Are there patterns that will help you get ahead and implement it in a way that will stick there for a little bit longer? So let's just dive straight into it. But before that, some of those things on the screen, you might be familiar with it. When we don't do well, if you're not mindful of implementing DevOps in an efficient way, DevOps has a likely chance of going wrong. And many times we see that DevOps has become pseudo-ops, meaning that you have a DevOps team that's sitting between developers and operations, and they're doing something in between, and basically it's another pattern of inefficiency. The second is it becomes a separate SRE team. In that case, neither operations is responsible for taking a reliability, neither developers. And then we create a new pseudo DevOps team again. We have also seen DevOps has a completely brand new team. One of the most honest conversation I've had was sitting in a customer and asking, why do you want to go DevOps? There were some members of the team, they really wanted, we want to become DevOps engineer. I said, what's stopping you? Well, we are not getting our title, DevOps, in our title. I said, why do you want it? Well, it pays us more. So thank you. That does seems like a market fact, but far from reality. And then many times we think DevOps is taking a step back. We'll have to do so many processes, retool everything. That will slow us down. Again, I think sometimes you have to take a step back to take a bigger step. And the last one is doing DevOps diluted the governance, security, and risk portfolio. There is no truth to it. If you do it well, it should actually strengthen, not weaken it. So with those, let's see with the patterns of efficiency, how do we correct it? My favorite and number one is enablement and repeatability. In DevOps, everything that you do, ask, can I scale it out to the rest of the organization? Can I rinse and repeat it? Meaning, how do I create templates? How do I create tools that are self-service, that can be applied? That's how you scale. If you have a DevOps team and they are ninjas and they are the only ones who know it, you're not going to scale. So it's all about enablement and repeatability. If you have a small tiger team or cloud center of excellence or pilot teams, whatever you want to call them, but make sure their goals are to create something that can enable rest of the organization, rest of the teams, and they are not the only ones who know how it works. Number two is speed. With speed, how many times you hear that, well, we are doing 100 deployments and 80 of them come back with the failures. Since we started doing CI/CD, our number of incidents that we get from the field has tripled. It's a very likely scenario, again, if you are not careful about what you are adding speed to. If you don't have a good pattern and you add more speed to it, guess what? You're going to fall into pits more often. So before you think about speed, think guardrails. And guardrails is more like a phenomena, it's a concept where you still allow your teams to have a little bit boundary and experimentation without killing their creativity, but still have a way where if they are going too far on the anti-patterns, you block it. You block them from falling in the cliff and dying. So if that happens, they will never be able to experiment again. So remember, speed is what we are after, but without guardrails, we all are going to fall off the cliff. And that requires you to have understanding on patterns that you want to invest in and really blocking anti-patterns. Third is inclusiveness. From my own experience, if there was a biggest mistake that I made in my career path is the inclusiveness. I did not include everyone when I was doing DevOps transformation. I had a small team. In 2013, I was at Edmunds.com. We did all-in migration, very successful, months ahead of time for less money. Everything was fantastic. What was wrong was...
How many rules did you automate for Carol?
I'm not talking about ITIL.
Fair enough.
The worst thing I did there was we were a small team that migrated everything. We shut down our data centers. We failed to include rest of the organization. So all the time that I gained with my teams on finishing it early, rest of the time that we were in doing training for rest of the team members on how it works. I failed in doing many other things. For example, it's very likely that as a part of DevOps transformation, you're conveniently forgetting about your finance team, your compliance team, your security team. I did all those mistakes and went back and retrofitted. So really, inclusiveness is something that you want to start doing from day one. Include everyone, and everyone will eventually understand what it means for them. Focus on differentiating factors. That goes along with inclusiveness. As you start to include everyone, are you really going to go and ask your finance team to write some bunch of Selenium test or some TestNG or whatever you are using? Not really. Allow them to focus on what they bring on the table. They bring in built-in core knowledge about finance, compliance, or other things. And like Mike was saying, how many DevOps people go and talk to these support functions in the organization, ask, hey, let me understand what you do, and let me create automation for you so you can focus on things that matters. So not only you focus on what you bring out the best, but allow others to do that as well. Last but not the least, but not the last for today, is built-in. And built-in goes much deeper than I can put on a slide. Built-in architecture for operability, built-in security, compliance, risk, governance, visibility, observability, built-in everything sooner. If you don't do it, the only option is bolt-on. And when you do bolt-on, we know things don't scale. We know that's when we have to go take a fork and do another journey. That's when you have to include other team members and you have to depend on them. But if you start to plan things much ahead of time, by inclusiveness also meant include in their design. Think about those concerns and include them in your guardrails. So built-in, and that would be the biggest message if I want to talk today, is built-in for everything that you want to operate to. Now, if you do it well, then wonderful things will happen. Not only you're going to scale, you are going to learn, but you're also going to teach and enable the rest of the organization. By doing built-in things, by building things in from beginning, you're going to empower and establish accountability from get-go. The biggest advantage you're going to get by guardrails is standardization. That's how you will scale. Standardization helps scaling and also helps in finding anti-patterns. And last is built-in, instead of really falling into diluting your security posture. So those are the 5 patterns I want to talk about. And with that, I think I'm going to bring in Mike back again.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, Ajit. And I think, one of the things to take away from those patterns, right, is we had 10 minutes to explain that to you. You're going to need to go deeper on all of these things. You're going to need to investigate these technologies and hopefully some of these patterns you're already using today. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Steve Day, who is the Executive General Manager of Infrastructure, Cloud, and Workplace at the National Australia Bank, NAB. Hey. Steve, let's do a practical exercise in Enterprise DevOps. Because the wonderful host here putting on the conference for us gave us these chairs on a stage. These are sort of our guide rails. We're to put them up here. So we're going to DevOps our talk. Right. Yeah, exactly. We have some guide rails. Here we are.
Okay.
All right. That's Steve. So Steve.
It's a young Steve.
Indeed it is. Yeah, you put on a little facial hair. All right. Steve is going to tell us how the team at the National Australia Bank are putting Enterprise DevOps to work. So first, Steve, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're doing at NAB today?
Sure. So I run cloud and infrastructure for National Australia Bank, which is one of the big banks in Australia. It's about 150 years old, very conservative organisation, and our IT over the years has become a bit staid. What we did is about 10 years ago, we outsourced pretty much all of our infrastructure. Put an outsourcer out there, and for the first couple of years it worked pretty well. And even if I look at it today, every KPI is green, but everyone hates the situation, right? Because we've lost our ability to innovate. When you have to do a statement of work and negotiate prices for absolutely anything, and nothing comes back under $1 million and probably 6 months to implement. That is a real barrier to innovation, which has sort of stopped us. So we've embarked on this cloud journey.
Sure. Yeah, Jeff Bezos often says, when the data doesn't match the anecdotes are probably right. And so if they say it's not working, maybe it's not. So NAB has just been in the news announcing you're moving 35% of your applications to the cloud. What's driving this strategy?
Yeah, well, it's not so much about the number, but it's about the fact that we need to get our outsourcing right? So we've outsourced everything and we've lost this ability to innovate. So we looked at it and said, well, cloud is actually good, public cloud in particular, because it allows us to outsource the stuff that really doesn't matter. Right, up to the hypervisor, nothing there, allows you to innovate pretty much. And so we can then insource everything above that and create platforms that will enable our application teams to create really cool applications and things that do matter to customers. Great,
yeah. So AWS has been offering a migration acceleration program. We kind of call it the 50 in 50, as you mentioned, right? And again, the number matters a little bit less. But why was this a good option for NAB?
Yeah, well, we actually did the 30 in 50 because 50 was a bit ambitious for us. But yeah, it was really important because it enabled us to change our thinking. And rather than creating all of these stage gate processes to implement something, this was the first time we could really look at something as the formation of a combined team that had an imperative to get these applications implemented within 50 days. And we would then get everyone together, work on that together, and we actually turned what a lot of people thought was impossible into something that was pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think that just looking at the graph is pretty telling, and it might be hard to see in the back, but the majority of the applications were moved in the later phases of the thing. Was there any escalations? Did you? I was.
Of course there were, right? You can't create this without a lot of tension within the organization, a lot of pushing, a lot of escalations, a lot of removing red tape, of challenging existing processes and thought processes to actually make it happen. But we got there, and it was really the right thing.
Yeah, it was a special time, I think, for both Steve and I.
Yeah.
So what did you learn? What were your big learnings, bigger than just cutting that red tape?
Yeah. So what we learned was this finally gave us the ability to actually do Enterprise DevOps. We were able to create a platform that had guardrails built in, but were invisible to the application team. So as they were migrating, as long as they didn't actually break any of the compliance rules, they didn't even know they were there. They were able to turn up these new landing zones, as we called them, extremely quickly, deploy their apps, and if everything was kosher and met all of our compliance rules, it just happened really quickly. And that's why we were able to meet that 50-day target.
Especially with legacy applications that have been running. They'd already been compliant, right? So moving them to cloud shouldn't all of a sudden make them non-compliant.
Well, we did find some cases where we had some stuff that had been non-compliant for a long time, that when we moved it, and we didn't know, and we moved it in and we discovered areas of non-compliance. So from that perspective, it was better.
The cloud can give you, and just the fact that you're moving something causes you to take a more strict eye to it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Sure. So, obviously a challenge of doing 30 applications in 50 days without a large technical staff. How did you just out of the gate able to sort of create those landing zones and support that from a technical perspective?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, we'd outsourced everything. We had no technical capability internally in our infrastructure teams. In fact, we're still struggling to build that up. It's hard to get cloud people. It's hard to train them at scale and very fast. So what we were able to do is leverage a service from AWS called AMS, Amazon Managed Services. And that gave us this platform out of the gate that had been designed by AWS, enabled us to send APIs to this service to just tell it to build a predefined landing zone that had been checked off by AWS as best practice, with all of the compliance tools that are best practice to use from AWS. And what that also gave us is some compliance out of the gate. We got ISO, we got PCI, we got a lot of Sarbanes-Oxley compliance. straight off the bat, we didn't have to do all that, and we didn't need to build huge teams that were capable of deploying these platforms before we got started. But having said that, it's a strategy, it's training wheels for us, right? We fully intend to wind that back after a couple of years and operate it ourselves after we've learnt what best practice really is, and we've learned it from the experts.
Sure, yeah, we talk about that a lot as experience-based learning, right? So if you're actually doing something versus whiteboarding out what a migration might look like, you actually get those learnings, you start building those skills to enable the insourcing of those value-creating teams.
Yeah.
Sure. What were some challenges of integrating your operating model, right? So you've got like all this, sort of on-prem, your legacy operating model that you spoke about, and now you've got these new landing zones that you're bringing out at a very high velocity, 50 days. Like, what are some of the things you learned along the way as it relates to operating model integration?
Well, what we learned is we had to really integrate it into our processes. So there's a lot of, we were under a lot of pressure to record everything we were doing and also make it very easy for our application teams. So the biggest part of this process was integrating it to our ITSM, which is ServiceNow. And that allowed us to, or allowed the application teams to go into a service catalog in ServiceNow, select the landing zone, that would be deployed within minutes. It would already have all of the continuous compliance running to make sure that the guardrails were there. The application teams could move at pace, and everything they did was then recorded in our CMDB. So it gave us all of the compliance that a large enterprise needs, but it also gave us a speed and agility that, is the promise of Enterprise DevOps.
Yeah, so to bridge those two operating models. Well, Steve, thanks a lot for talking about your use case.
Thank you.
We shall turn it over to Jason.
Thank you, Mike and Steve. That was fantastic.
To
Excellent.
introduce Jason. Thanks, Steve.
I would like to bring up Jason Cow from Fidelity. Jason has fantastic use case and a story on how they turned around on Fidelity, things there. We talked about a bunch of 5 patterns, and something that Jason at Fidelity and his team did is some very different and very innovative as well. Let's talk about it. So Jason, first of all, welcome, and tell us a little bit about yourself, what your role is at Fidelity and what you do.
Sure, Jit. So first of all, Rocco, thanks for this beautiful photo of me that you have. It's fantastic. Thanks for pulling that from LinkedIn. So my name is Jason Cow. I'm a director of security architecture at Fidelity Investments, where my team and I focus on building security tooling, security infrastructure, and building basically the enablement behind getting our development teams out to cloud quickly and securely.
So, I remember the idea of Enterprise DevOps resonated with you, and you started to learn more about it. What was in it particularly that attracted your attention?
Yes, Ajit. So I'm actually going to rewind a few years back to a couple years before. And one of the things that we've seen a lot at Fidelity, especially in security, is something that I like to call security by checklist. So I know Mike talked about this earlier, right? He talked about this list. I think Carol, right, had this list of 75. So what you'll see is basically a development team develops, go through their software development lifecycle, and then they're like, okay, we're ready to go to a higher environment, and then they bring it to the security team, the compliance team, the audit team, and they say, here's a list of things that you must meet, like a grocery list, and as long as you get a check on all of them, you're free to go to prod. The problem with this is A, it's cumbersome, B, right, it's slow, 3, or C, I should say, it's ineffective, and it's a point in time thing for compliance, for security, and that's not what we want, right? And we want to really get to the model of embedding security within our development teams. And so this is a repeat slide from what Mike showed earlier, and I think it really resonates because on the left, right, you have your traditional IT. You have a large enterprise like Fidelity, which has a lot of different groups. And on the right, you have this perception of DevOps where you have a jack of all trades, master of none, where they do everything. And what we've done is my group actually within our organization is a center of excellence, a security center of excellence. So what we do is we provide the right tooling necessary to automate some of these tasks, these simpler tasks. And the more complex ones, we actually sit and consult. And I know some of the guys in the audience are from Fidelity as well. And we actually consult and sit with these development teams to make sure that they can do, and we can make sure that those complex security issues are solved correctly.
So help me understand, typically in a large scale organization like yours, and then there's a ITIL and DevOps and old way of doing things, typically you run into conflicts. Was that also at play for you?
So that was legit. One of the things that we noticed is when we first started kind of going along with this mindset of DevOps, you hear things like, operating at the speed of DevOps, operating at the velocity of DevOps, the agility, right? All these buzzwords about just speed in general. And that's the original mindset was, how do we migrate to cloud? How do we develop in cloud quickly? And then we actually changed that, where we had a mindset of, how do we not just migrate to cloud quickly, but how do we migrate to cloud quickly and securely with the right guardrails in place?
So did you have to go out to your DevOps team, like we were suggesting, or they came to you?
We've had a couple interesting discussions, and the interesting thing, right, is that we're in the center of excellence within a development organization, so we can sit with them and basically bridge a gap and say, hey, we understand what you're trying to do, we understand the value add, but what we're really trying to do is make sure it's not just quick, but secure, because that's what we're all about. It's that culture of inclusion that you talked about earlier.
So we were also talking about how do you scale it out. Now, your team was center of excellence. Did you have other challenges? Like, how do you scale it to the rest of the organization? Otherwise, you would land up pretty much where I landed up, is only my team knew how to do it.
Definitely. So we have a few challenges. And actually, I want to do an ask the audience here. So how many of you guys, raise show of hands, right, had to travel or fly into Vegas for reInvent? Okay, that's a lot of you. So how many of you guys actually had to go through airport security to get to reInvent? Hopefully the same amount of hands. I'm actually going to do one better. So I'm going to do something different. I know so by show of hands, how many of you guys are at the Venetian today? Should be all of you. If you're not, no questions there. So when you walked in the Venetian, right, there's security, there's a line there, right? So let me ask you this. How many of you guys saw that as a roadblock, a minor inconvenience in your way? And for airport security, right, did you have to take off your belt, take off your shoes, take out 5 laptops that you decided to bring to reInvent, or like the 7 portable battery chargers that you guys brought? How many of you guys saw that as a nuisance? A fair amount of you, right? And that's not the point, right? The point is security is not a roadblock. I'm sure you guys have examples of where a security team comes to you, that list of 75 that Mike brought up, right? They come to us, or a development team will come to us and say, okay, how do I solve the easiest ones? How do I get back out to production? Or, show me the quickest fix. Don't show me like the real crux of the problem. That's what we're trying to solve. That security is trying to help, and we're trying to, security and development are trying to work together to get to the same place.
That's fantastic. What you told me is resonating with me a lot, is you not only created a list for low-hanging fruit, you automated them and you implemented into templates. So that's fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about how did you scale it out?
So one of the things we noticed, right, is we can either embed, there are a couple different options. We can embed security personnel within development teams, but the problem is, your security group is a center of basically subject matter experts. And actually, a couple months ago, I talked to one of my colleagues in UXD, user experience and design, and she mentioned like, well, hey, how do I get, I don't have enough resources to spread across all these different dev teams. I also don't have enough resources where, if they're working on these, they can't focus on what they're really meant to focus on, right, which is true hard UXD. And one of the things that really resonated is, how do we actually get security to scale? And that's by building automation, building the right tools and frameworks, which we'll talk about later, and then basically letting the security center of excellence focus on the hard problems, right, the ones that really matter, the ones that are differentiators. And this solves 2 things, right? One is it helps us scale. And the second one is it helps us basically say, okay, these subject matter experts should be focusing on the hard problems, right? The hard security problems that most people can't solve, right? That you want these security experts to solve. And that's the second thing it solves for.
So in that, are there technology-specific implementations that you did that help you achieve these?
Yeah, so we have a lot of security tools in our toolbox. We started with a detective suite and a remediation suite, right? So I'm sure you guys have seen if your instance is out of date or out of compliance, you whack it and turn it off. That's part of our detective and remediation suite, right? We have detective controls that monitor and scan our environments. We have remediation controls to address those issues as needed. What we've actually done is we've added preventative controls that we can actually put in the pipeline, whether it's CI/CD, you can run it locally, such as static scanning on your CloudFormation, dynamic scanner, any testing you can run, right? And this is shifting left and earlier in the development cycle. And what we do here is we identify security problems earlier than dev cycle, and basically what we do is reduce the time to value that it takes, because previously, right, and Mike and I were chatting about this earlier, a developer would go through, they get hit with that 75 list from Carol, and they have no idea what's the problem, right? They don't know, it's been months since they developed on that, they have no idea where it's from. But by shifting left and bringing in these preventive controls and saying, okay, you can scan right away, you can identify those problems and they're fresh in your mind too.
Love it. Yeah, so you started building in a lot of things ahead of time in your CI/CD pipeline. What you also mentioned is pretty interesting, is security in the pipeline and security of the pipeline.
Correct.
Great job on that. So are there other challenges on your priority list that you're working through?
Yeah, so some of the other challenges we face, right, is, well, one is how do we shift earlier in the DevOps cycle? Is basically looking at one of our tools, right, and we've seen this as an and-I pattern. We use a lot of CloudFormation for our infrastructure. And one of the things we've seen is for things that are, I think, rather important, right, so identity and access management, networking components like that, sometimes teams will build separate, or central teams will build separate APIs or separate pipelines to go through. So by doing that, what it does is segments the dev experience, and it forces people to learn different tools. One of the other tools that we use to solve some of these challenges is AWS Service Catalog, right? And we can layer that on top of existing AWS products, existing AWS CloudFormation, and still allow developers to push out with CloudFormation, and that gives them a very, not simple, but less complex experience when they develop. And we don't want to introduce more complexity when we go through and try to figure out development ops or development cycles.
Excellent. We are literally on time, so if you can talk about what's next now that you have achieved this place.
Yeah, so at Fidelity, our journey is really never complete, right? We've done a little bit of automation. We'd like to continue that automation so that we can kind of continue our journey. We'd like to see basically, what security can we truly automate as our workloads grow larger and more complex, right? The security around those becomes more complex as well. So to continue our journey, we want to enable our teams to not just move quickly, but to really move quickly and securely to cloud.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming down and really sharing learnings. I hope our attendees here will get to learn more about in coming days as well.
Sure, thanks, Ajit.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you, Jason. All right. So thanks so much for attending. Again, I'm Michael Eshu, and this is Ajit.
Yep.
Say your last name.
Ajit Jadgaonkar.
I still haven't said it right. Just to tease some other things we're up to. There you go. We're going to do Enterprise DevOps, begin with production-ready migration. One went this morning. We're going to do another tomorrow morning. So it'll be with the AMS GM, John Brigden, as well as George Watts, somebody from our professional services operations integration practice, and Steve talking a little bit more deeply about the NAB 30 and 50. We'll also repeat this talk. If you want a colleague to come and have a look at it, please invite them to come and see us. Same time tomorrow, different place. Check the app for the app update. And of course, please complete the session survey. We'd very much appreciate you sharing with us how you enjoyed the talk today. Thanks so much for coming. We'll be up front if you want to chat.
Thank you, guys.